Hello and welcome to Sound Basics. I'm David and today we're going to talk about four things. First of all, we're going to talk about house mixing, how to adjust the mix for each channel on the faders, and how DCAs work as far as different groups that you can use to quick mix during service. Second, we're going to talk about monitor mixing, how to adjust the faders so that it sends the right mix to the monitors throughout the church service. And the next, we're going to talk about live stream mixing, how to adjust each channel for the live stream mix so that our online viewers have the best possible mix and best possible sound throughout the service. And finally, we're going to talk about mixing method, how to balance channel to channel, group to group, instrument to vocal, etc. throughout a worship service. All of that and just a little bit more right after this. Let's get started. This first, before we get any further, this is the console of the Rock Church. This is the Behringer X32. It is a phenomenal piece of equipment. We have been using it here for quite some time, and it's something that I have used in my professional career in many different aspects for several years. So that all said, this is what we use here. And it's broken down into some pretty basic sections. Let me go through those for you. First of all, we've got this channel adjustment section here in this top left quadrant. This is where you're going to edit all of your configuration and preamp settings, all of your dynamic settings, your equalizer, your bus send adjustments, your main bus adjustments, and this is also where your USB record port is located. This is a great section of the board. There's a lot of things you can do with this portion. A lot of that is not going to be talked about in this video for sake of time and for sake of simplicity, but if you want to learn more, there are plenty of resources available to you through YouTube and through the church here that you can access to learn as much about this board and its use as you can possibly imagine. Now, the second in the top right quadrant of the board, you've got your actual edit screen. And then you've got a couple other panels over here. You've got your monitor adjustment. You've got your talkback panel here. And these are great. Obviously, they're the primary features of the board. And several of them you will actually use from time to time. Now, this adjustment panel here, you're not going to probably use that too much and at the level that we're teaching here in this video. But this is your primary display. This is where you'll look to see, what the EQ looks like, what the compressor looks like, any of your effects, any of your settings on the board are going to be adjusted through this window. We're not teaching that in depth at all in this, but again, more resources are available to you. If you would like to learn, please go and take the initiative on yourself. Learn as much as you can, become an expert so that we can then take advantage of you all the time to teach and to learn and to do. The other two sections here, you will definitely use. They're on the either side, there are handles of the board, and inside each handle is a 1/4-inch jack for headphones. In each jack, you'll need to put one of these. This is a 1/4-inch to 1/8-inch headphone adapter. For you to hook headphones into that, you'll need to take one of these. You'll insert it into, I won't be able to do it because I can't reach around and I can't see, but you'll insert it into the hole or the jack inside the handle. And then you actually have headphone monitor output control here. So you'll just adjust this knob up and down, and this will give you the amount of volume you need so that you can hear what you're mixing. Now, I definitely don't recommend that you mix for the room with headphones. The reason behind that is because headphones are going to give you a lot more balanced, closer, more intimate sound, and you'll be able to hear a lot more fine-tuned detail as far as whether this person's singing louder than this person, and etc. Now, that is good for one concept, and that is that you can hear balance a little bit more clearly and a little bit easier as far as balancing vocals together. That's very important. Now, when it comes to balancing your channels for the room, we're going to talk about mixing a little bit later. But when it comes to that, you're going to want to listen to the room because the room is going to have a little bit different sound. It's going to have natural reverbs. Things are going to be bouncing off the walls. You're going to have the difference of an empty room with just chairs or a full room with lots of people in there, and there's lots of acoustic things that are going on there. So this is going to be specifically used for some mixing that I'll talk about later, but specifically isolating who on the platform is singing and in what channel they're singing. Or if you're needing to hear if there's a buzz coming from a specific channel, you can also use this. Now, how you would do that is if you look down here at the board, and we can cut to our second camera here, you'll see there are buttons labeled solo on each individual channel here. So in order to activate the headphones, to activate each channel in the headphones, you would just select that channel by pushing the solo button. It'll light up yellow. And then with that headphone adjustment, you can actually hear that channel specifically. So that's the top right quadrant. In the bottom left quadrant, you're going to have all of your channel faders, or at least, yeah, all of your channel faders and your bus faders. So let me explain what I mean by fader. A fader is this silver toggle here. It's a fader because you push it up and down, it's very smooth, and you basically fade the audio in and out with this control. It's very fine-tuned, it's got a lot of minute control, and as you look here, we can cut to our second camera here. Hopefully you can see this. It goes all the way up to +10 and all the way down to -infinity. And what you're doing is you're adjusting the audio through a super fine-tuned, feathered volume control between basically 0, absolute nothing, through all the way up to what's called unity, which is marked as 0 on this board, which is kind of like the perfect balancing point. And then obviously you've got a bit of overhead there that you can push and make it a little bit louder. We won't talk about this until a little bit later, but there's a thing called gain structure. We may not talk about it much in this video because it's a little bit more advanced. But basically it says that you should mix all of your channels to be at 0 so that you have absolute control, maximum control. And the reason it says that, if we can cut to our second camera over here again, is from 0, you've got -10 in 1 inch, and then you've got +10 in another inch or so. So those controls are super fine-tuned. You have incremental controls of a +10, -10 decibel shift. When you get down from the -10 to -20, it's actually half as much distance for the same amount of volume, right? And then -20 to -30 is the same, but then -30 to -40, it's actually a quarter of the distance for the same amount of volume control. So that's why we say we put it at unity, that way we have the most possible control. Now, I don't want to bog you down with too many details, so let me just give you the gist of it. You've got 4 buttons here on the side of this particular quadrant. You've got the channels 1 through 16, which are inputs through the snake, which, that's going to be referenced in your sound manual, so take a look at that and how that's all laid out. But you have channels 1 through 16, and then channels 17 through 32. You notice how that shifted there a little bit? These are motorized faders, which is amazing. When I first saw this board, I was like, it's like Star Trek up in here, So 17 to 32 are on the second button down. These are called bays. So bay 1 is 1 through 16. Bay 2 is 17 through 32. Bay 3 is your auxiliary and USB and effects returns, which you won't go to all that much. Sometimes you'll go to this one to adjust the computer input as it comes into the board. And then your final bus, or your final bay down here, is Bus Master, and this will show you all 16 buses you have available. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner of the board, in this quadrant here, you've got a couple of different things. You've got your DCA controls here, which will explain what that means. And then you'll have your master volume output here. And then you'll also have your scenes panel, and then some of your assign buttons, which you kind of program those. But for right now, we won't talk about that too much. And then mute groups, which we'll talk about the basic setup that we have available to you, but for the most part, it's just pretty standard stuff. And then again, you've got 4 bays that you can select from. So number 1 is your DCAs, 1 through 8. Number 2 is your buses, 1 through 8. Number 3, buses 9 through 16. And number 4 is your matrix outputs, which we won't go into much detail about those in this video. We're going to primarily focus on our channels 1 through 16, 17 through 32, and then our DCAs for this first portion. So now we're talking about mixing and how to do mixing for the house. There are two important functions that you need to understand how to do. Number one, you need to understand how to mix each channel together, how to adjust the fader for an individual channel so that you can mix that audio signal in and out of the overall mix. And then you'll need to understand how that you can bulk mix in different chunks so that you can feather things in and out as you need to for a service. So let's take a look. Cutting to our secondary camera here. These are your individual channel faders. We talked about this just a moment ago. You got 1 through 16 and 17 through 32. 1 through 16 primarily comprises musicians and instruments. We used to have bass here, but we moved it. But we've got drums from channels 2 to channel 9. And then channel 10 is our main keys. And then channel 11 is auxiliary keys. Channel 12 is organ. Channel 13 is acoustic guitar 1. And then acoustic guitar 2 is 14. And then we have our tracks left and right as 15 and 16. So to balance, to adjust, say for example, we're playing in a service and we need to adjust for the main keys is too loud, or maybe they're too quiet. Let's just say they're too quiet. So the main keys needs to come up a little bit to be heard clearly in the mix. So what do? Well, there's a couple of things we can do, but the first most important one is to check to make sure that the channel for main keys is putting out enough audio. So we come over here, we already have it selected, 1 through 16. And we've got to go over to our main keys and let's just pull that up a little bit. Let's just adjust that volume up. That's going to give us that specific channel more volume through the entire mix. So that's kind of, and you can repeat that process for all the instruments. And then channel 17 through 32 here, primarily comprised of bass guitar, a couple of instruments, some talkbacks here, but majority of it is going to be speakers and vocalists here at the back end. And this is the one where you're probably going to be doing a lot more fine-tuned individual channel adjustments, specifically because different vocalists sing at different volumes, and you'll need to make sure that they are heard clearly, especially if they are given a solo and there's no transition between microphones. So that's how we're going to adjust individual channels. Now, once you've gotten everything kind of balanced, this is a really good example. We're already here. So vocal channels are 26 through 32. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 different vocalists, not including our worship leader at any given moment. And the most important thing with vocal channels is that we balance them to each other. We make sure that no one vocalist is standing out and kind of messing up the mix. So we'll come in here, we'll do fine-tuned adjustments, we'll fiddle with that. And once we've got that figured out in practice, our next thing that we need to do during service is to make sure that the vocals sit in the mix in a level that makes sense with everything else. So we've got our band, we've got our drums, we've got our worship leader, anything else like that, and then we have our vocalists, and we have to make sure that they all kind of fit together. So how do we adjust the vocals as a group? Once we have the balance adjusted, we don't want to come in here with 7 fingers and just kind of adjust everything manually up and down. No, what we can do is use what's called a DCA. I don't remember what DCA stands for, but my editor is going to put it up on the screen, so DCA is going to go right across the middle here. That's going to tell you what that means. Wow, that's amazing. But what we're going to do is we're going to go to our DCAs. Cutting to our second camera, we have them right here. DCAs 1 through 8. And what we do is we've got those. If I hit the select button, that'll tell you which channels are actually in that particular group control. So basically what it's done is I have selected all of our vocal mics to be controlled overall by this one fader here. So now I've got this perfect group mix, and then I've got this fader that I can adjust up and down the entire group as it is mixed. It doesn't adjust individual channels, it just takes the entire group, mixes it all up and all down. So that's how we're going to go about balancing the vocals, or any group for that matter, into the worship set in a direct kind of group control once they're kind of fine-tuned. So mixing for the house is as simple as 2 steps. Number 1, you mix during practice. I'm going to go ahead and say this on the video, and it's going to be backed up by all of our leadership here. The sound mixer for the service needs to be there for practice. Please, 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 as the sound engineer for that service, please don't show up at quarter to service time starting and expect to have a great mix and a great sound quality that day. If you do, it's no credit to you. It's only credit to the person who mixed the last time they did it. So please, for your sake, for the sake of all of the worship team, for the church, please make sure that you're there on time. And on time for practice is early, 10 minutes at least early for practice. So be there. If practice is at 8:30, be there at 8:20. If practice is at 8:45, be there at 8:35. You see what I'm saying here? So most important thing, practice attendance. So be there. And then that'll give you the opportunity, and I know that practice tends to be a little spotty and a little, kind of disorganized from time to time, and that'll get better with time, but what you need to make sure to do is give yourself the opportunity to understand the songs, to understand the balance, and it'll also help you know who is singing solos so that whenever somebody starts to sing something, you're not surprised and you don't have to fiddle around and, I don't know, I don't remember which one it is. Oh, here it is. Let me get them up, turn them up, and then by the time you get them turned up, their solo's done. It's happened to me. It's happened to all of us. We're not expecting perfection, but we are wanting definite effort put into it, okay? So what we're going to do is, first thing we're going to do is mix through practice. You'll have the opportunity to mix every song and understand the balance that every song needs, and if there's an instrument feature or a vocal feature through that song, you can do that through practice. That'll give you the opportunity to fine-tune your vocal mix. That'll give you the opportunity to fine-tune your drum mix or your instrument mix. And then once you have those groups, individual channels mixed together, then you can balance those groups through the DCAs. And then the second part of house mixing is actually live during the service. Now, the way that I educate, the way that I train, the way that I teach other groups and other teams to mix is to do all the fine-tuned mixing on this left-hand side of the board with all of that during practice. Do all of the fine-tune adjustments during practice. If there's any EQ adjustments that need to be made, if there's any compression adjustments, which we're not teaching those things in this video, but you get the idea. Any fine-tune adjustments that need to be made, do it during practice. Get it finalized on this side during practice and move over to here at the end of practice so that you can have an idea of how to balance all of these groups together. And then in a service, if something needs to happen or an adjustment needs to be made, you shouldn't have to go in and adjust, except in rare circumstances. You shouldn't really have to go in and adjust an individual channel all that much or all that dramatically. It should be pretty standard. So you can just go in and just adjust those groups, feather them in and out, make sure that they all blend together into a nice cohesive sound. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is house mixing. So keep that in mind. Now, moving on. Second thing we need to talk about is monitor mixing. Monitor mixing is very much the same as the earlier part of house mixing when it comes to individual channels. The DCAs are not going to have much to do, actually they're not going to have anything to do with your monitor mix, but you are going to need to use this section on the bottom right-hand side of the board. What you're going to need to do to mix for monitors is you're going to need to go down to your buses here. You see this second button here and the third button, those are your bus sends. You're going to need to select the one that has the monitors for the praise team, which is going to be bus 1. So you hit the bus 1 through 8, and then you'll notice here the first one that you'll see is monitors, and it's usually yellow, and it's got this fader. It's usually turned quite low so that we don't have any competing volume with the monitors and the house speakers. So in order to mix for that, what you'll need to do is you'll need to select it. So you'll hit the select button here. It'll light up green. And then once you have it selected, you'll hit this button here that's labeled Sends on Fader. And once you hit that, you'll notice that the faders on the bottom left-hand side of the board have all begun to change, to move. Let's turn it off, turn it on, and you'll see the difference. Now, what that is showing you is what each of these faders, each of these channels, how much volume that is sending to this mix. This is actually technically a separate independent mix from what you're actually sending to your house speakers. I know, right? I didn't know you could do that. Basically with the board, each of the buses that you have available to you, there are 16 available, each one of those can essentially be its own separate custom mix. All you have to do is tell it what channels you want to send audio to that bus, how much audio, and then where all of that bus output needs to be sent to. And we're going to talk about that again in the next section called live stream mixing, and we'll give a little bit more detail there. But for this purpose, this bus is called monitors, and it's just outputting to an amplifier and then amplifying out to speakers. On the platform, there are 4. You'll see one on either side of the pulpit, and then one on either side on the outsides of those 2. That's our monitors for our platform, so, and our singers and our preachers. So to mix that, again, you just hit the select button, it'll light up green, and then you hit the sends and fader button, and then you'll go through, and whatever channel you need more or less of, you will just grab that fader and you'll push it up and down until you have the right amount of volume for that channel in that mix. The last thing I want to mention about monitor mixing is that this is something that needs to be done during practice time. So again, reinforcing the need for you as the sound engineer for that particular service to be there during practice. Please be on time. Be there for practice, because what you do as you mix monitors actually gives confidence to the singers, to the worship leader, and even to the band eventually, that once they get to the service, they can hear what they need to hear, they know what they're doing, and they're more at peace in their mind, so that their spirits as they sing can really connect with the worship and then connect with the people who they're leading in worship. So practice, practice, practice. Don't miss it. Don't be late. Don't be late. I want to put that in big letters right here. Don't be late. All right, the third thing we're going to talk about in this video is live stream mixing. Live stream mixing is identical. Let me say that again. Identical to monitor mixing. It is almost exactly the same. In fact, you probably will remember this from the previous section, that all you've got to do is find the bus, select it, and hit the sends and fader button. Now, it's not quite the same just because of the fact that it's not this bus. What you'll have to do, we could go to our second camera for this, is you'll have to select buses 9 through 16, which is just here, 3rd button down, 3rd bay on the DCA section on the bottom right-hand side of the board. So select that button, and then you'll see buses 9 through 16. You'll notice that one of them is labeled preacher fill, one's called recording, one's called guitar, one's called lav EQ, and then there's a couple that are not used, and then a couple that are used for effects. So the one, yeah, you guessed it, the one we're going to be editing for our live stream recording is called recording. I know, it's super, super creative and just such an out-of-the-box way of labeling that. Nobody would ever have guessed that we would have, okay, that's enough. That's enough sarcasm. We're going to just go ahead and show you how to mix it. So what you got to do, same process as mixing with the monitors. You hit the select button, it'll light up green, and then you hit the sends and fader button, and it'll show you the level that each of the channels are at sending to that. Now, that is actually doing a similar job, but instead of outputting it to a monitor and then to speakers, it's actually sending it out through a cable that goes up the wall behind you, over the ceiling, and then down into the production booth to your right. Yes, that way for you. So when you go out of the board, you go through a mic cable, it goes into the mixer or the switcher for the live stream, and then you've got your broadcast mix. It's super, super simple. It has been preset with compression settings, EQ settings, etc., to give it the best possible sound that we can get from this board for a live broadcast mix. And it's just, it's great. The reality is that we have gotten several compliments on our live stream. And a majority of them, I mean, the video looks great, the cameras look awesome, the switcher is great, we're doing a great job. If you haven't seen the other 2 videos, camera basics and switcher basics, I challenge you, go watch those and learn. But the reality is that our audio is really where we shine. We're getting a lot of really clean, sharp, crisp audio, and that is due in large part, if not exclusively, to this console right here. So that's how we mix for the live stream. Now, the last thing that we want to talk about is mixing method, and that is essentially how you balance the different parts of a worship team together to create the comfortable and clear mix that you get when you listen to a church service or to an audio recording, etc. And we're going to talk about that right after a word from our sponsors. All right, welcome back. Great word from our sponsors there, so check that out. What we're going to do now is we're going to talk about mixing method, or mixology method as it's titled in the manual. Mixing method is essentially how you balance the different portions of a worship team together to create the overall clear, crisp sound. So there's a couple of different things that you'll need to understand. There are three basic, let's just make it four. There are four basic elements to having a clear sound, or there are four basic elements of that sound. Number one, you've got your vocal leader. Number two, you've got your backing vocals. Number three, you've got your band. And number four, and we're going to separate them from the band. I know that essentially they're usually part of the same thing, but we're going to separate the drums from that and make that a fourth element. So what you want to do is you want to develop or understand the hierarchy of music when it comes to how to mix all of these elements together. So when you listen to the music, what is the first most important thing that you hear? 9 times out of 10, you're going to hear the vocalist, the primary lead vocalist. That's what you're going to focus on most, and it's majority of the time it's because it's what your brain connects with on an intellectual level better, right? Now, musicians out there, or musicians even watching this video, you're going to be thinking to yourself, well, I hear the drums, or well, I hear the viola, but there's not a viola in there, so joke's on you. So yes, instruments do stand out, and instruments do have a primary significant purpose, but for the most part, majority of people hear the vocals the most. And they also tend to complain the most when the vocals are not clear. So how do we fix that? What's the mixology method? How do we balance them all together so that we're hearing what we want to hear, but that nothing is overpowering or nothing is confusing anything else, right? So I'm going to throw something out there to you that's probably going to blow your mind, maybe confuse you, or at least challenge you in your thinking about what's most important in music. The first thing that you need the most of, and again, just don't shoot the messenger, I'm just telling you what I know from study and from education. The thing that you actually want quite a bit more of than anything else is drums. You know, I know, right? Yeah, it's like, oh, well, we can't have more drums, that's too much. We can't. No, here's the thing. Drums establish tempo, they establish drive, they establish rhythm, and they establish energy. If you don't have drums, then all of your great music tends to ebb and flow in time, and it gets super slow and draggy, and then it gets super fast and energetic, but there's really no power behind a lot of it without drums. So in order for us, and this goes for live stream mixing, this goes for house mixing, across the board, 9 times out of 10, your drums need to be the baseline. You set your drums, and then everything kind of fits around them, believe it or not. I know, that's like shocking. And then you have just slightly above and around, depending on which instrument, you have your band. Now, your band as a group doesn't sit exclusively above your drums. Majority of the time, if you're going to block them like this, it's going to end up being closer to even. Your drums are going to be slightly under, if not slightly over, your band, so that they've got all that nice punchy drive, depending on the music, obviously. If you're playing like ska or jazz, you want your saxophone or whatever to be the number one instrument. You know, if you're playing bluegrass, the spoons need to be the loudest. No? Okay, nobody else gets that. There's nobody here to get that joke, it's fine. So, yes, your drums and your band, they need to be almost neck and neck. Certain instruments need to be definitely lower. For example, your bass guitar doesn't need to be pushed that much because the frequency that it plays is going to carry anyway. No matter what volume it's at, it's almost always going to cut through because it's got that low frequency sound that takes a long time to terminate. Let me explain one thing theory-wise when it comes to sound. Sound, if you don't know this already, occurs in what's called waves, just like this, right? A sound wave, determined by the frequency, can either be super short or super long. Longer sound waves or deeper waves, those are actually lower frequencies, and they take a longer time and a longer distance to actually terminate, to get to the point where they're audible, right? But higher pitched frequencies are shorter and they actually take less time and less space to be heard. So that's why if anybody's ever experienced a bass guitarist who plays bass guitar through an amplifier and he sits on top of his amplifier, he's got that bad boy cranked all the way to the top and he can barely hear it, right? But with it cranked all the way to the top, you know, grandma back in the back side of the church is getting like blasted, you know, her hairpins are flying out, and it's not because of the Holy Spirit, it's because of the fact that that low end, those frequencies travel so far before they terminate that by the time they get to her, they're just blowing her face off. So you have to understand how those kinds of things work, and you have to use that knowledge in accordance with how to mix. So lower frequency things don't necessarily have to be quite as loud because they're going to take longer to terminate. They're going to actually reach further than higher pitched things, versus some higher pitched things that need to be louder. But just for the process of this mixology method, we're going to talk about it in blocks. So your drums here, your band can ebb and flow up and down next to your drums, right? And then you've got your vocals, your backing vocals, and those actually need to sit slightly under the drums as far as overall volume. Now, I know what you're thinking, but we want to hear more of the vocals. Yes, I agree, but the backing vocals are not the part that you need to hear a lot of. They're the part that needs to support the other part that you really need to hear, which is the main vocal. They're not a feature of themselves. They are a supporting aspect on the vocal side of the music. So they need to undergird, if you will, to use a biblical term, they need to undergird the main vocal. So you got your main vocal, and then you got your backing vocals. Now, you notice the gap is a lot different here than we were talking about with band. Band is more like this to drums. Vocals, main and backing vocals, are quite a bit different. It's a lot more dramatic. And the reason why is because your backing vocals, if they're too loud, they'll compete too much with your main vocalist. And then your main vocalist has to scream and shout everything he or she says to be audible above the rest of the vocalists. And we don't want that. We want to make sure that what they're singing and saying and sneaker preaching, if they want to, is clearly audible to the whole team and is balanced with the rest of the vocalists so that they're clear, they're supported by the others, but they're not overwhelmed by the others. So here's your general mixology method. You've got your worship leader. I'm going to start on this side. You've got your worship leader here. They're going to be probably the most dominant. And then over and down a good portion is your backing vocals. And then over and up a good portion is your almost level with your worship leader is your actual band. And then over and slightly down, and then sometimes also slightly up, are your drums. And that's usually how we kind of fit that all together. In your manual, hopefully you've gotten a copy of that. If you have not, please see Sister Kristen and she will get you a copy, whether digital or print. But in your manual, you'll see a section called Mixology Method, and in there's a little bit more detailed diagram about how each thing needs to fit together volume-wise in a mix. It's a nice little hand-drawn chart from yours truly, and that should help illustrate these ideals a little bit easier, a little bit more clearly for you. And that pretty much brings us to the end of Mixology Method. I know that was a really brief and basic way of explaining it, but I hope that you understand and I hope that it helps you. But today we talked about house mixing, how we're going to use the individual channel faders as the starting place to custom blend each channel with each other. And then we're going to move over to our DCAs so that we can see how to block mix during a practice and then moving that process primarily with block mixing over to our main service. Then we also talked about monitor mixing, how to find the bus, how to select it, how to adjust those faders by hitting the Sends on Fader button, and adjusting that mix, and how to do that in the time frame that works best for our singers, primarily during practice. Practice, be there. I'm going to keep driving that home, but it's important that you be there on time. And then we talked about live stream mixing and how to find that bus, how to select it, how to mix that one as well, and how that goes from this console to our production booth. And finally, we talked about mixing method and how mixing method works within the confines of a worship team, how to balance the drums and the band together, how to balance the primary vocalist with the backing vocalists, and then how to balance those two sections of the music together to create a nice, solid mix. We have the mixing, I think it's called the sound, Sound 10, TRC Sound Manual 1, version 1, I think is what it's called. That's going to be made available to you soon, if not already. That should have a lot more detail and a lot more information. I challenge you to read it all the way through. Take advantage of the resources at the end. I believe it's going to be a benefit to you. And in the grand scheme of things, 2 more things I want to add. Number 1, don't forget to have fun. Having fun is paramount. If you're sitting behind this console and you're just hating every second of it, then man, get out of there. Nobody needs to be sitting there through church angry the whole time because, well, I don't want to do this. I don't want to like this. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants you to be suffering through it. Just don't do that to yourself. But if you do genuinely love it, then don't forget to have fun, because it can be fun. You can feel like you're operating some kind of crazy spaceship when you push and pull and twist knobs and whatever you're doing with this thing. And if you decide to pursue it and learn and educate yourself beyond the basic versions that we're talking about in this video, you can even learn about remote mixing and how to do so with an iPad, or how to even automate different things from start to stop in a song, or how to mix per song and switch between song presets and different things like that. There's so much that you can learn about this. And if you really enjoy it, have fun with it. Learn it, do it to the best of your ability. And the second, and then obviously most important thing, and I've said this at the end of the last 2 videos, and I'll say it again here, that is, never forget that this is a ministry. There are 2 kinds of sacrifices that we make every day. A sacrifice of praise, where we give our actual praise. God, we praise you, we worship you, we give that to him. And the second is a sacrifice as praise. The sacrifice as praise is where we do what we do as our worship, as our praise unto God. That's what this is. This isn't necessarily going to be the job that you can do and then just, cut and run and do a lap or dance like David danced or whatever. Like there are going to be some restrictions, some limitations that are going to be on you because you're doing this particular job. But that doesn't mean that it's not worship, and that doesn't mean that you shouldn't consider it part of your worship. It's not a job replacing your worship. It is a job that you are doing as worship. So treat it like that. Treat it as worship unto God. And I guarantee you, if you have fun with it and you treat it like worship, you'll never regret a moment sitting behind this console, providing a service to the church and to the people and to God that will forever be remembered or at least enjoyed. So all of that, and I just want to say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and happy mixing and happy engineering. And see you around.